Imagine the last fresh vegetable you ate. Hold that image. Now imagine that was 6 months ago, and it will be another 6 months before you see another one. No grocery store, no delivery, no preserved vitamins in a capsule, no orange juice, no salad, no fruit of any kind, nothing green, nothing fresh. Nothing that has not been smoked, dried, salted, fermented, or frozen since last September. Outside your window right now, minus 30 degrees. 2 feet of snow on the ground and more falling. The river you fish from in summer is a solid block of ice 4 feet thick. The animals you hunt have either migrated south or gone into hibernation in places you cannot reach. Inside your longhouse, what you put away in autumn. That is all you have, that is all you will have, for 6 more months. Now here is the question that should be impossible to answer. How was a Viking warrior physically capable of rowing a longship across the North Atlantic? How was he strong enough to carry weapons and armor and fight hand-to-hand against professional soldiers? How did he not have scurvy? How did he not have rickets? How did he not have the nutritional deficiencies that were destroying armies across medieval Europe at the same time? How was the food system keeping people healthier than the most sophisticated civilizations in the world? The answer is in the barrel in the corner of every Viking longhouse in history, and what was living inside it. To understand what the Vikings figured out about food, you first need to understand what everyone else was getting wrong. Medieval Europe had a food problem, not a scarcity problem, though scarcity happened, a nutrition problem, a preservation problem, a fundamental misunderstanding of what food actually does to the human body problem. The standard diet of a medieval European peasant in winter was bread, porridge, occasional salted meat, and whatever root vegetables could be stored. That is essentially it. For months, the bread was made from grain that had often partially spoiled in storage. Ergot fungus contamination was so common that historians believe mass outbreaks of St. Anthony's fire were actually mass ergot poisoning events. Thousands of people simultaneously eating contaminated bread and experiencing symptoms that looked like divine punishment or demonic possession. The salted meat was often borderline rancid by midwinter. Medieval salting techniques were inconsistent. The concentration of salt needed to preserve meat was not always achieved. The result was meat that was technically edible but actively harmful. High bacterial load, oxidized fats, and salt concentrations that stressed kidneys already under winter hydration pressure. The root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, beets, provided calories and some minerals, but almost no vitamin C after months of storage. Fresh vegetables are the primary dietary source of vitamin C. Once they are gone, the clock starts. Scurvy begins to appear after roughly 4 to 6 weeks of vitamin C deficiency. The first symptoms are subtle: fatigue, joint pain, slow wound healing, easy bruising. Then the gums begin to bleed. Then old wounds reopen, healed scars literally splitting apart as the collagen holding them together breaks down without vitamin C. Then teeth loosen and fall out, then internal bleeding, then death. This was happening across medieval Europe every winter. Not to everyone, not dramatically everywhere at once, but consistently, at low levels, grinding down the health of populations that did not understand why they were sick. And meanwhile in Scandinavia, the Vikings were eating from their barrel. Walk into a Viking longhouse in October. The harvest is in, the autumn slaughter is done, and along the walls, in the coolest corners of the structure, are barrels, wooden barrels, oak staves, iron hoops, sealed with pine tar, varying sizes, some the height of a man's chest, some small enough to carry. And inside those barrels, everything. Fermented cabbage, functionally identical to what we now call sauerkraut, packed in salt, compressed under weight, left to ferment in its own brine for weeks until the lactic acid bacteria had transformed it. And here is the critical detail that changes everything. Fermented cabbage contains more vitamin C than fresh cabbage. Fresh cabbage stored in a root cellar loses its vitamin C steadily. Fermented cabbage in brine maintains its vitamin C content for months. The Vikings were not getting scurvy while British sailors were dying of it on ships in the exact same era. They were not getting scurvy because of the barrel. Someone had figured out that cabbage preserved this way kept people healthier through winter. They did not know why. They just knew it worked, and they kept doing it. But the cabbage barrel was only one part. The fish barrel was another. Herring packed in brine, fermented for weeks to months. The fermentation process breaking down the fish proteins into free amino acids, the most bioavailable form of protein that exists. The Norse ate fermented fish in some form at almost every meal. Every meal. Omega-3 fatty acids critical for cardiovascular health, brain function, and immune regulation were a constant daily presence in the Viking diet. Not a supplement. Not something you took occasionally, just food. Just what you ate every single day. The Viking food system was not designed. Nobody sat down with a nutritional framework and planned it. It evolved. Across centuries of living in an environment that punished nutritional mistakes with death. And what evolved was, from a nutritional science perspective, remarkable. Let us go through it systematically. Protein first. The Norse diet was extraordinarily high in complete protein. Dried fish, fermented dairy, meat, fresh in autumn, preserved through winter, eggs when available. The amino acid profiles of these foods cover essentially every essential amino acid requirement the human body has. This matters for winter survival in ways that go beyond muscle maintenance. Protein is thermogenic. The body burns significantly more energy digesting protein than digesting carbohydrates or fats. A high-protein diet literally generates more body heat. The Vikings were eating themselves warm. Fat second. The Norse diet was extremely high in fat. Animal fats, fish fats, dairy fats, seal blubber in Iceland and Greenland, bear fat in Norway. Modern nutrition has complicated feelings about fat. The Viking body had no such complications. Fat is the most calorically dense macronutrient. In an environment where maintaining body temperature requires enormous caloric expenditure, fat is survival. The specific fats, heavily weighted toward omega-3 fatty acids, carry anti-inflammatory properties that protected joint function in the cold. Fermentation third. Every fermented food, the dairy, fish, vegetables, was delivering something modern science calls probiotic bacterial cultures. Living bacterial colonies that, consumed regularly, colonize the gut and fundamentally alter how the immune system functions, regulating the production of neurotransmitters that affect mood, motivation, and cognitive function. The Vikings were not depressed in winter at the rates modern populations experience. They were feeding their gut bacteria every single day. Minerals fourth. Seaweed. Norse coastal communities consumed seaweed regularly as food and a flavoring agent. Seaweed is one of the most mineral-dense foods. Iodine, critical for thyroid function and metabolic regulation. The Norse did not know about minerals, but they lived on a coastline that provided them constantly, and it kept them functional in ways that inland populations simply could not match. Here is what the food system could not fix. Famine. Not the slow nutritional depletion of a winter that stretches a few weeks longer than expected. Real famine. The catastrophic failure of the food system that happens when everything goes wrong simultaneously. Bad harvest, early hard frost destroying the root vegetable storage, disease sweeping through the livestock, a storm destroying the dried fish stores. The Norse sagas describe famine with a specificity and a rawness that suggests these were not rare events. They were part of life, expected, dreaded, sometimes survived, sometimes not. The word the sagas use, hunger, appears repeatedly in accounts of difficult winters, and the solutions described are not elegant, desperate, bark bread made from the inner bark of pine trees, ground and mixed with whatever grain remained, almost entirely indigestible, providing almost no usable nutrition, but filling the stomach enough to reduce the physical agony of hunger. Boiled leather, old leather goods, worn-out shoes, broken harness straps, discarded bags, boiled until soft enough to chew. The collagen in the leather providing minimal protein. The act of eating providing psychological relief as much as physical sustenance. And worse things the sagas mention obliquely, things that every culture in extremis eventually confronts. The winter of 975 in Iceland is documented in the sagas as a famine year of particular severity. The accounts describe communities making choices about who could be fed and who could not. The elderly, the very young, the already sick. The Viking food system, brilliant, effective, nutritionally sophisticated beyond its time, was a system built for ordinary hard winters. It was not built for catastrophe. And catastrophe came anyway. Because it always does. Because no system, however good, is proof against everything. The Vikings knew this. The sagas are full of it. They did not build their food system because they believed it would always be enough. They built it because they knew it would not always be enough. And something, even something that sometimes fails, is better than nothing. So they built the best something they could. And when it failed anyway, they rebuilt it. Every spring that followed every catastrophic winter, they rebuilt it. Because that is what you do when the alternative is not rebuilding it. In 2023, researchers at the University of Copenhagen published a study on the gut microbiome of modern Icelanders, a population that has maintained traditional fermented food practices across the centuries since the Viking Age. The study found something striking. The diversity and composition of gut bacterial colonies in Icelanders, who regularly consumed traditional fermented foods, was measurably different from those on modern diets. Not just different, better, by almost every immune function marker the researchers measured. Higher diversity of bacterial species, more robust immune response profiles, lower inflammatory baseline markers, better regulation of the compounds associated with mood and cognitive function. The researchers were careful about what conclusions they drew, but the implication was impossible to miss. Something that Icelandic families had been doing continuously since the Viking Age began not as a health practice, but as a survival necessity. The only way to keep food edible through 6 months of frozen darkness was producing significant biological benefits 1,000 years later. The barrel in the corner of the longhouse, still working, still producing the same bacterial cultures that kept Viking communities functional. Think about what that means. A Viking woman in 10th century Iceland, packing fermented cabbage into a wooden barrel by firelight, while the first October snow fell outside. She had no idea she was building something that would work 1,000 years after her death. She just knew it kept her children alive through winter. She knew the barrel her mother taught her to make was the difference. So she made the barrel, and the barrel worked. And her children survived, and their children made barrels. 1,000 years later, researchers at a university with equipment that would look like magic to that woman are measuring the effects. She did not need a laboratory. She needed to pay attention. She needed to remember. She needed to pass it on. The barrel is still there. You can buy Skyr in almost any supermarket in the world today. The technology has not changed. The bacteria have not changed. Only we have changed. We stopped making the barrel. We outsourced knowledge to an industry that sold us the idea that what our grandmothers knew was primitive, and the laboratory was superior. The Vikings did not conquer the winter with weapons. They conquered it with fermentation, with patience, with the barrel in the corner, still full, still working, still keeping people alive.